Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and this is Wicked Flicks. For this particular episode, I'm going to be talking about the spectacular documentary Tim's Vermeer, brought to the world by Penn Teller. This is a documentary that absolutely mind blows. It's mind blowing. It's astounding. And it really kind of encapsulates the idea, you hear about child savants who at the age of 3, 4, and 5 are already like mentally learning every note of an entire musical composition, a classical composition, and are able to play it back, whether through mimicry or having the talents inborn in their nature to recreate these classics and improvise, add a level of improvisation and make it their own, encapsulate their own sort of sensibilities and give it their own voice and all that kind of stuff. And these are real world, like amazing feats of nature, of humanity. There are so many accomplishments humankind has been able to perform, and sometimes with the assistance of technology. And one of the things that really intrigues me about this piece, for those who are completely unfamiliar, it basically chronicles the journey, the 5 years or more journey of a longtime friend of Penn Jillette's, one half of the duo, the magic performing duo, Penn and Teller. This guy by the name of Tim Jennison, who had, he was an art enthusiast and was becoming more and more familiar with sort of the, I guess you could say, questionable or controversial sort of outlook that one particular art enthusiast and sort of expert had written a book about a 17th century Dutch, I believe it was, painter by the name of Johann Vermeer, which I think is how his name is pronounced, Johannes, Vermeer, who was able to create these very meticulous paintings. There's a series of, I think it's 6, that they showcase in the film toward the beginning of it, that are almost like photography. These are elaborate paintings, and when x-rayed, when studied, there is no sort of pencil work or sketch work underneath them. They are simply and utterly the paint set to canvas as if manifest miraculously, but with an almost photogenic precision that just simply astounds. And the question has long been debated and raised in the annals of art culture: how could this have been brought about? Part of the dialogue that the book that sort of inspired Tim Jennison, who is, again, the star, the featured role in this documentary, to question and to suppose, was the assertion that there was some kind of 17th century technology, some form of optics that may have been in use, as well as mirror work and things that are explored in this particular piece, that, again, it blows the mind. It's quite an astounding, sort of idea, a concept that through technology, I mean, you think of the great artisans like Michelangelo and Da Vinci, people of this Renaissance sort of era. There was a technological aspect that aided their understandings of art and what passed for science of the day and all these kinds of things. And this film very adequately and even more so broaches the question of, well, how did Vermeer manage to create such elaborate, meticulous works of art with an almost photo precision, almost looking as though it were a picture, a photograph. Cameras were not in existence back then, while lenses were, and the refraction of light and all these different optical manipulative devices and things of that sort. The film very much has this guy, Tim Jennison, debuting this curiosity. He seems to be a jack of all trades for all intents and purposes. He's very susceptible to, confronting a problem and then going through the motions of learning how to conquer it, overcome it. Any hurdle that presents itself. Almost arguably, I have heard some resounding speaking out about the film in the derogatory to suggest, is this just a grand hoax? I mean, it's Penn and Teller. They are known to be magicians and to try to put one over on you. That's kind of part of their reputation, even though I would argue, being a fan of theirs, it's kind of the opposite. I mean, there is a level of manipulation in the form and function, the performing of magic and tricks and that kind of stuff. But they have always been about no BS, truth above all. And they respect their audience and the intelligence, the intellect of their audience enough to say, what you're seeing is a trick. We're not trying to pass this off as some miraculous thing. It is something the layperson will not understand, but they do at the base understand what they're trying to accomplish is, just play a trick, do some grand sort of design on basic concepts of trickery and sleight of hand and all these kinds of things. And so with that sort of forthcoming reputation of who Penn and Teller are, there are people who disbelieve the focused person involved in this piece, Tim Jennison, in his being able to accomplish something like he does in the piece, which is what he basically does is, because he has a background in understanding technology and all this kind of stuff, physics and calculations, everything along those lines. What he has set out to do, inspired by the novel that this art expert has written about Vermeer and speculations on what kind of tools and apparatuses this 17th century Dutch artist might have used in creating these very photorealistic paintings in that era. What Jennison has then done is crafted his own, invented his own means by which to explore that. There's a couple different devices, the camera obscura, which was something that was actually legitimately used back in the 17th century, which is kind of like you take a box, you enter like a pinhole into it, and if you darken the entirety of the box, you will see a refracted, upside down sort of reflective image of what is outside the box on the opposite face. And this is one way they explore that this might have happened, where you had a room decked out, you had people standing in the room, presumably hours and hours and hours of the day, something like that, and this artist Vermeer would meticulously craft his paintings along those lines, as if capturing it as a mirror image on a wall. But then this is kind of debunked because it's not going to work. The way the paint and the color scheme matches of the paint behind the reflection or the image that is transposed on the wall, it doesn't work. It cancels each other out. So how would he have done that? And this Tim Jennison cat, he looks beyond that and he creates other things that might have, he goes to such a level as to create actual devices the way they would actually have been created, from molding lenses, molding apparatuses, to then craft the crystal work and the glass work, or however that is done exactly. I'm not somebody who creates that stuff, so I have no idea. Even though they show it in the documentary, it's still going over my head. I'm not really sure what's happening here, but I'm understanding what he's doing because they're showing it meticulously, all of the crafting that this guy does to create lens work and create apparatuses of mirrors and reflective, refractive devices, and really explore what was available in the 17th century that might have allowed for Vermeer to create these photorealistic paintings. And the interesting thing about it is, without wanting to spoil how this particular documentary culminates, it culminates in a very astounding way that gives you goosebumps. And I myself, I have to admit, there was a level of almost, not being able to swallow what was happening, because I just felt like there were certain things that seemed to come to Tim Jennison too easily, as far as overcoming those hurdles, as far as adapting himself to problems and realizing he was at one point very out of his element. He had kind of misconstrued or misinterpreted what exactly he thought the processes were. And there's a point in the documentary where, because the original piece at the time was being displayed in Buckingham Palace, they had flown over there. They were seeking over many months to try to get in to see this particular, the original painting version of the one that they end up choosing to reproduce which I believe was called the piano lesson, Vermeer's piano lesson. And the Queen and you know, whatever the the highfalutin you know, sort of people who are in ownership of this piece would not let that happen until the very last 11th hour minute. You know, and Jennison was able to go in and see and spend time with the original piece for like a half hour. He couldn't record any footage of it or anything like that, but he was able to look at it very meticulously, and he understood suddenly and profoundly that everything he had done up until that point, and this is a multi-year journey, a more than 5 years journey of exploration and speculation and talking to experts and coming up with inventing processes by which to try to recapture what might have been put into the creation of these 6 paintings, most specifically the piano lesson. And he realizes after a while, this is beyond what I assumed it to be. This is beyond the capabilities I thought I had at the outset. What am I going to do? And so because Jennison is that very adaptable kind of person, do you see him actually go through the process of, you know, revitalizing himself and reapproaching the entire scenario? With how exactly to go about trying to reproduce in the same manner it must have been done, arguably so, back in the 17th century, to have such a photorealistic art, you know, created with no sort of, I guess you could say, preliminary work, no sketch work, no anything like that. It just appeared on the canvas as if miraculously, as I say. And it really explores the technological inspirations that might have gone into the form and function of creating these very just standout pieces of art. Some of the best of the best of the best art pieces, paintings that have ever been produced ever in the history of mankind. And I very much admire the work of Vermeer. I'm not very familiar with a lot of it. I have an interest in artists such as Alex Ross and Norman Rockwell and Edward Hopper and things of that sort. And so there is a sort of contemporary aesthetic to some of the things I gravitate toward. And when I learned of Vermeer, which was actually set in motion through finding out about this documentary that sought out to recreate one of his masterworks in similar means that he might have done back in his time, that set me about wanting to look more into this artist and some of the things he created. And I've just been astounded at the level of realism, photorealistic realism, that is represented in these works. And I would argue that you almost don't get the full effect, and this is something that plays in the documentary. You don't necessarily get the full effect of just how much craft work must have gone into it, you know, without actually seeing the real, genuine, physical article. Because pictures, reproductions, and all those kinds of things, which are how we usually consume, the mass populace who are, whether loosely or devoutly, fans of art, art enthusiasts and things of that nature, unless you actually have access to the original pieces, there's something lost in translation. You don't quite get to see every meticulous level of detail. And so this was something that was very much the mind operating scenario for Tim Jennison. And when he finally spent time with the painting, as I say, he suddenly had this newfound and very crushing awareness of there was much more than he assumed to the production of the original piece. And this sets him on a new path, a new course to really explore that and understand that and try to bring about the recreation of this 17th century masterwork. Again, I'm not going to spoil how it ends, whether he succeeds or whether he fails. It's quite an amazing journey that very much speaks to the idea of the human condition and the extraordinary feats humankind can perform. One of the things I have found very intriguing is a lot of the backlash, especially in the art community, about this particular subject matter, especially when it comes to Vermeer, because there is a level of people feeling that the artistry, the craft of the art, is somehow undermined by the influence or suggestion of influence of technology. And this kind of equally blows my mind, that for whatever reason, for whatever purpose, anyone who is an artist or who claims to be an art enthusiast or whatever whatever their craft may be, to not see technology in its various forms, whatever that equates to, whether the 17th century use of lenses and mirrors and reflective technology, whatever the highest equivalent of the day was, to using home computers to write manuscripts and print out manuscripts this day and age, to think that using and purporting the idea that technology is something that can propel art and can support art is somehow demeaning that art. That is very much the tack a lot of people have had in reaction to Tim Jennison's seeking to prove that Vermeer used these technological apparatuses and things of that sort to accomplish these great works of art, that it could not have been anything more than the miraculous prowess of the man, that he must not have had any interference, any outside, technological devices to assist him in the creation of those things. And a large reason why it is a debate, and such a heated one, is because unfortunately there is not, as they say in the documentary, a lot of files and records to show exactly what this particular artist's craft, where he learned it, how he evolved it and manipulated it, and all those kinds of things. Where other very well-known artists along the course of history, there are textual works and back catalogs explaining how they learned and adapted their craft and these kinds of things. With Vermeer, there's none of that has yet to be found, or has yet been found. And so there is a large heated debate, especially in the artistic community, that by seeking to perform or recreate these artistic masterworks through a sort of using and manipulating technology, you're somehow perverting the original artistic piece, the artistic work. You are somehow undermining the natural talents of the artist. Whereas the sort of very, I guess you could say, objective viewpoint is to say these are things that he likely crafted to they were a means to his end of creating this artistic masterwork. They were a support to that. They were a support to that journey of going from point A, an empty canvas, to creating a masterwork. In no way lessening the talents of the man, but that much more boosting what he was able to accomplish. And, there are people taken aback by that and very scathing about that, because they feel like it jeopardizes the actual prowess and talents of the man. Because the technology, it's the artifice, the artificial apparatus that comes in and it's a human being needing help. It's kind of like, arguably, it's kind of like the argument, well, humans couldn't have built the Egyptian pyramids. It must have been aliens. Only it's kind of the opposite tack, because technology is what? Technology, and unfortunately, arguably a perversion of human prowess and capability in the idea that there was slavery to build the pyramids, but it was human ingenuity that calculated and performed the creation of those great wonders of the history of the world. It wasn't some outward influence that actually would pervert it and make it easier for humankind, dumb little man, everything like that. And similarly so, does this documentary posit the idea that the technology that Vermeer might have used was a springboard to answer to his seeking to create these masterworks. It wasn't something that, made it suddenly somehow that much easier. I mean, when you're watching this documentary, there's a lot of time, and I believe they said all told, over the many years that they were filming this, there was like over 2,400 hours of footage. They had to encapsulate it down into 4 or 5 and then construct the documentary, the 70 or so minute documentary, out of that. And there are large swathes of it. I mean, it's the documentary, it's not boring. It's not like, being taught a lesson that just bores your mind numb. It is something that it's miraculous, but in the sense of how it portrays the amazing nature of humankind, what the human being is capable of, especially if they have a passion and they have a drive, they have a vision, and they are, you know, incapable of or unwilling to back away from it and give up on it. And it's astounding to me because there are lighthearted moments, there are very entertaining moments. There's just one that got a big laugh out of my sister and I. We were both watching it at the same time, where Jennison, you know, he realizes at one point that because there is a rug, there's a very meticulous, you know, a meticulously crafted rug in the piece that he's seeking to recreate, the piano lesson. And in having a look at the original piece, you can see all of the mending and hem work in the painting that recaptured what this real rug it was based on must have looked like to Vermeer's eye, whether using this apparatus or not, but more likely using it. And so in order to encapsulate and recreate that, what Jennison then has to do is literally hours upon hours, days upon days of little dots of paint to equate to each of the knots in the fabric of the rug he chose to reproduce for his attempted reproduction. So there's a point where they just kind of go silent and he looks at the camera because they keep cutting to him and they cut to the brush strokes and everything like that. All the meticulous work that goes into the very highly detailed painting he's trying to recreate. And he just says, another day, another dots, or another day and doing many dots, you know, something like that. And it's just the way it hits you, the way he delivers that line. It's not scripted. It's footage of him on his daily routine of coming into this office where he's had a warehouse, he's knocked out a wall, and he's recreated the entire room as it would look that was in the painting, featured in the painting, which was, I believe, a room that actually existed in Vermeer's home at the time when the painting was probably created. And so, you know, Jennison, I mean, everything he does to craft reproducing this room, that work in and of itself is kind of mind-blowing. You know, trying to recreate a 17th century chair, you know, trying to get an instrument, like a big, you know, bass instrument, you know, string instrument, because one was featured in the painting, getting the exact sort of instrument, you know, all these things that he had to meticulously craft and reproduce as it would have been in the 17th century to very much not do this in any modernized framework is mind-blowing. And that's before you ever get to setting, you know, paint to a canvas and trying to reproduce the actual painting. And then that is a whole process in and of itself. And the entire journey, again, without spoiling whether he you know, fails or succeeds ultimately in the end, the journey is an amazing one. Because the level of dedication and curiosity and passion that went into exploring the very notion that technology created this work or helped, assisted in the creation of this work, again, in no means undermining the talent and the prowess and the passion of Vermeer himself, who created the original work, is simply miraculous, is simply astounding. If you can go into it without any sort of reservations or precognitive idea that, you know, oh, it's Penn and Teller, there must be some level of trickery or hoax or anything like that. There's none of that. It is very real and very truthful. And you know, it's the journey of a very creative friend of theirs who has a passion for technology and a curiosity in art. And having those two, you know, mindsets come together in a quest to see if it can actually be done, if you can successfully recreate a 17th century photorealistic artistic work, whether or not that's capable. It just, the question alone is astounding, and the journey is that much more so. And I could not more highly recommend, drop everything you're doing and seek out Tim's Vermeer by Penn and Teller. Directed by Teller, the originator of the idea was Penn, who just had a sort of discussion with this guy, this old friend of his, and Tim Jennison was describing this curiosity, and Penn just said to him, this could be a film. This should be a film. And a documentary film is exactly what it was, but it wasn't like a boring brass tacks, tooth and nail. You know, there isn't sort of a point of view, there isn't a sort of message, but a message does come across by the end that humanity is miraculous. And the achievements of mankind know no bounds when the imagination and the heart and the passion are put into it, are backing it, with the assistance of technology in some way, shape, or form. And just wanted to bring that to your attention. Anyone who happens to be watching this video, if you've seen the film already, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is one hell of a watch. And it definitely had to be represented in this video series of Wicked Flicks, as I call them. Just stuff you should make time for on your catalog of things to watch and things to experience, because it is an experience. It's not just a watch, it's an experience. And that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.